It was just a normal day of salvage. Weather on Assurance was mild. Our quota wasn't too bad, and we had more than enough. But Summer wanted us to get more because we didn't know how bad the next quota from the company was going to be. It went up and down all the time. One week it can be only 130 credits, and next week it could be 950 credits. And the company bought at all kinds of rates. Tomorrow was the last day we can turn in the salvage and meet quota, and Summer was so certain that the buying rate was going to be 120%. So every basket of bottles, every dustpan, and every clown horn was practically worth its weight in gold. We landed on Assurance, a brand new facility we haven't hit before, as winter and spring ran alongside me to the entrance. I have been running with these ladies for almost 3 months now, and even through everything, and all the secrets we had shared, and all of our shared experiences, we still all went by code names. Summer was our leader, and she led us from the ship, communicating through our walkies, while spraying Winter and myself, all salvaged through the abandoned facilities of these trashed moons. Almost every day we went to a different facility, bypassing the ancient security and sneaking by the dangerous mutant life forms that could harm us, all working for the company, a weird company that wanted our salvage and paid us different rates every day, giving us seemingly random quotas, but would also sell us luxuries like lemonade powder, blankets, and even a rare candy bar. Treasures that would have run thousands of credits back home on Track M. So, as exhausting as the work in the Thistle Nebula was working for the company, I prefer it over Track M's mines and forges. We climbed the ladder and we made it to the main entrance. Spring went first, followed by Winter, and finally myself. Like most facilities, the front entrance had 3 doors for the 3 of us. The buzzing fluorescent lights and the hum of the fan told us that there was still power in the facility, which was good news. Any chance to conserve flashlight power was a godsend, and if we got lucky and found the apparatus that powered the facility, that would get us a nice chunk of change with the company. The downside to there being power to the facility meant that security doors, turrets, and landmines all still had power. Some of these defenses were established hundreds of years ago and were still the lethal company of these facilities. Summer, back on the ship, was our only hope for getting past these dangerous defenses. Just like every other time, we split up. We would each go through a different door to see what we could salvage in the hour and bring back to the front doors. At that point, we would discuss our next step, led by Summer on the ship, who advised anything she saw from her radar, as we were her eyes and hands in the facility. I took the western door, where I found a stairway leading down and a storage closet directly across from where I entered. Despite being labeled as a storage closet, there wasn't anything of value. A few plastic containers that once contained cleaning chemicals that were now evaporated, a few mop handles that were too brittle to use, and, weirdly enough, a few filing cabinets full of files that had long since rotted into pulp. A recurring theme with these facilities seemed like they were very disorganized and abandoned very quickly, judging by some of the salvage we found. Even in a room like this, I still pinged my echo scanner in my helmet. My suit didn't just keep me safe from the gases of the facilities and kept me from directly touching anything rotten or rusty. The helmet had an echo scanner, a handy little radar that could tell me if there was anything valuable or dangerous within a few meters of myself, even letting me map ahead in total darkness. Sure enough, behind the shelf there was a stop sign, still attached to the pole that once held it. Maybe it was knocked over and held in storage before being forgotten. Maybe it was being stored before it was supposed to be set up. Only it never had a chance to be set up. It was hard not to speculate about the story of the salvage and the facilities we were in. Rooms that you think would have something valuable, like server rooms, bedrooms, and even assembly lines, may have nothing at all. And then you find things like a bar of gold just lying on a stairway, or a V-type engine in a hallway that only connects one stairway to another stairway. And that was only the strangeness of the salvage. The facilities themselves felt like they were designed by a complete madman. Hallways would twist and turn for seemingly miles, and then only end in a dead end that held nothing. Sometimes rooms are guarded by multiple turrets and landmines, and you find nothing in the room at all. No salvage, no bodies, no notes, nothing. Almost nothing in the facilities were labeled at all. Sometimes security doors would have a half-erased letter and number. A few closets were labeled as closet, but otherwise there were no notes, no writing, nothing to distinguish anything in the facility from other facilities. Even on the exterior, the facilities weren't labeled, and we passed by massive tanks that we had no idea what the purpose was as we tried to get indoors. There are large factory assembly lines, and other than sheets of metal, large metal bolts, large axles, and air horns, we had no clue what they were supposed to be building here. There are large office rooms with no chairs, no desks, and no windows, just tacky wallpaper and plastic carpet. These facilities often felt like a horror story if it wasn't for one very key detail. There were no bodies. There were never any bodies. Anywhere. Not even evidence of bodies. No blood, no bones, nothing. We would find dead creatures occasionally, but no dead people and no evidence of dead people. Whatever caused the moons to be abandoned in the Thistle Nebula caused everyone to be evacuated. Everyone except those who worked for the company. I headed down the stairs and I make it to a very large room whose purpose I cannot guess. There are two large metal cabinets on opposite sides, and in the center of the room was a very large pit that seemed to plunge forever. Only a yellow rusty guardrail guarding me from oblivion. Whatever the purpose of this room, I don't know. There were a few fluorescent lights on the ceiling and a stairway leading to a metal walkway above. I checked that way first to see if there was another door leading somewhere else. Sometimes there is, but for me, there was nothing there except for a can of spray paint in the corner. I picked it up and I shook it, and sure enough, it rattled. It brought me a smile. I haven't seen graffiti since Chalk M, and Summer always said getting spray paint from the company was something that we couldn't splurge our limited budget on. Maybe I could convince her to let me do overtime? Well, good for her. She didn't have to crack a credit, and I could finally paint a bit. I have never seen graffiti nor evidence of anyone being here before us, so surely there was no harm in making my own bit of art. I headed downstairs to skim through the metal cabinets. One cabinet was completely empty, and the other had a large metal bolt. By large, I mean it was practically the size of my head. I don't know what these bolts could possibly be used on. Maybe the company was building Dyson spheres or other superstructure? These bolts were too large and the head was as wide as my face, but the actual body of the bolt was barely as long as my fist. I couldn't imagine anything that required something that was so large but so short at the same time. And yet, these bolts were practically the standard on the moons of the Thistle Nebula, but I never saw them used on anything. Still, I got a message that we had to meet at the main entrance with what we have found. I nodded, and I checked the blank wall by the door as I shook the can again, and I sprayed a quick message on the wall. Autumn was here, 1968. I signed on the wall before I made my way back up the stairs and then back to the entrance. That was another odd thing about these moons. Time felt like it was practically flying. Surely there was no way I was in there for an hour already, and yet when I checked my clock, it did confirm I was in there for an hour. At the main entrance, there was a nice pile of salvage, and all I had to show for it was a stop sign, a bolt, and a can of paint. Winter and spring had a good haul. Despite myself, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy. Sometimes I found a good haul, but more often than not, spring and winter got most of it. We talked briefly, and it was decided I would start running the salvage back to the ship, while winter and spring kept exploring their parts of the facility, especially since mine was a dead end. I looked over the pile as I sighed, and I began to prioritize what to bring back. There was a can of red brand soda, a toy cube, both of which strapped easily to my toy belt, but I had to leave behind my flashlight and radio, but I wouldn't need it for a quick run back to the ship. I hope. Then I saw that there was a whoopee cushion and something I have never seen before. A mask, not like the kind on our faces, but like the old Greek tragedy mask from the ancient days. A quick ping of my echo scanner told me it was worth 50 credits, but thankfully the whoopee cushion was worth more, so it needed to be brought back first. My tool belt full, I grabbed a V-type engine, which took both of my hands to hold. It looked a lot like a stoplight, and unfortunately it weighed just as much as a stoplight as well. I struggled to get it outside, and as I opened the doors with my elbow, I couldn't help but feel like the mask was watching me. Outside, I dropped the V-type engine down the ladder before climbing down. The company didn't care about the quality of the objects, just that they got the salvage. Not to mention that V-type engines were practically indestructible. Even centuries later, they were still used on our autopilot ships. I huffed and puffed as I waddle ran back to the ship, pushing myself through a crack between two rocks to make it back to the ship. A large rectangular ship that looked more like a shipping container that learned to fly than an advanced autopilot ship that was able to navigate across the nebula in mere hours. I huffed over to the ship and I dropped the engine onto the platform surrounding the ship before I took a few breaths before climbing up onto the ship. These environmental suits may protect us, but they get hot easily, and I was already sweating very badly, with the sun nearly directly overhead. I sighed as I picked up the V-type engine and I brought it to our big stockpile. The largest pile of junk in the entire Thistle Nebula. Sure, there was a red cabinet right next to the pile, but that was reserved for our equipment. And piled right next to the cabinet, giving it barely enough space to open, was our salvage. V-type engines, jars of pickles, clown horns, tattered metal sheets, large axles, metal bolts, and even an apparatus or two glowing in the pile. So I kicked over some junk to make some space for the heavy engine. Then I dropped the other gear from my tool belt. I grabbed a water bottle from the cabinet as I took off my helmet to take a swig of water. You need to go back out there. They have more for you to bring back. This may be our biggest haul this week, Summer said, not turning from her screen. Her helmet is on at all times, even when safe on the ship. I flipped her off before I took another swig, and then I put my helmet back on as I made my way back to the facility. I know she didn't see me flip her off, and even if she saw it, she wouldn't have cared. Still, Holy fuck. It felt good to flip her off as I made my way back to the facility. The trip back was a lot easier, with the sun already starting to set as I made it to the doors and I opened it. There was a toy cube, a plastic fish, the tragedy mask, and a glowing yellow apparatus. The only light in the facility with the power gone. I clipped the fish, cube, and mask to my tool belt, thankful I don't have to look at it, as I grabbed the heavy apparatus in my arms. It was even heavier than the engine, and unfortunately a lot more valuable. I turned to leave when I heard screeching behind me. In a panic, I turned to face it, hoping that I would survive, only to be relieved that it was just spring. "Hey there, where's Winter?" I asked her as she pointed down behind her. She says she found another survivor, so she ran down further into the facility. I came back to let you know. If she did find a survivor, this will be big news, Spring said, and I nodded in agreement. Yeah, that's huge news. That either means that people have been living in these facilities for hundreds of years, despite what the company is telling us, or another salvage team left them behind. Spring finished for me. Our ships automatically left the moon at exactly midnight. Our team always finished well before midnight, but we had heard stories of teams losing individual members, or in some cases, entire teams left behind. The company didn't bother to spend the credits on trying to find survivors, and the teams that tried to come back to find them never found anyone, and they never found a body, nor evidence of a body. Almost like whoever was left behind just vanished without a trace. But if we found a survivor from one of those salvage teams, that would be a game changer. Get the salvage back to the ship, grab your walkie and flashlight. This is officially a rescue mission. We're going to breeze by quota tomorrow, Spring said as she turned around and headed north into the dark, quiet facility. Even though the trip back to the ship was harder physically, it felt quicker with how much my mind was racing. A survivor? Either a descendant of a colonist or another salvage team? We would be heroes to the company. The other teams would be talking about us for weeks, if not months. We might even be bigger than Sigurd, the man who made the bestiary of these desolate moons. His notes were so invaluable that they were all well known to all employees of the company, from the lowest intern to the highest boss. By the time I dropped off what I had to the ship, the sun was down and I had to trek quietly back to the facility. In the darkness, I could hear the growls of the eyeless dogs. Despite their name, they're mutant descendants of lions. Unable to see, so they hunt by sound, but I was able to make it back to the facility without any eyeless dog. As I opened the door into the silence of the first room, I grabbed my radio, spray can, and my flashlight as I tried to use my walkie-talkie to call for the others. Any luck with the survivor, Winter? I called out, only to be responded to by only static. There was no call from the other end. No voices, nothing but static. Not even from Summer. I sighed as I kept the walkie-talkie on as I moved into the hallways heading north. It was frustrating when no one responded, but that might have just mean that their battery died, or that they forgot to turn on their walkie-talkies as I wandered further into the facility. Come on, everyone, we have to go. We don't have a lot of time left before the ship just leaves us behind. I yelled out in the facility, hoping that only my coworkers heard my voice. The autopilot ship doesn't just navigate for us, it also can cause the ship to leave at midnight to avoid damaging the ship and any salvage on board. Even if Summer didn't want to leave us behind, she would have to. if she wanted to survive, and any of us left behind would almost definitely die before any company ships found us. Still, I had to find my coworkers, even if I didn't have a lot of time. The hallway was practically just a metal walkway over darkness, as it finally ended in a large storage room. Nothing valuable, just a bunch of rotten trash and a fire exit on the far door. A great find for me, especially since I saw one of my coworkers crouched over in the corner. From behind, I could not tell who it was. "Hey, we gotta go. Where is the other?" I asked, as I realized that they were crouched over someone. Their black boots were kicking with an orange hazmat suit. "What's going on?" I asked as I grabbed the figure's shoulder, as they turned to face me, and I froze for a moment when I saw the face and who they were crouched over. The figure on the floor was Spring. Her mask was ripped off and her face was leaking blood. Her eyes, nose, and mouth were leaking blood onto her face. Her skin was so pale she had to be dead. However, her hands and feet were twitching still. Yet Spring was practically heaven compared to the figure that stood over her body. If it wasn't for the name tag on her uniform, I wouldn't have recognized her. Winter. Her orange hazmat suit had lots of different hairs that revealed her wounds underneath. Her wounds leaked something that looked like oil. As it dripped out of her wounds, they fell hissing on the ground. Biggest difference was her mask. Instead of the black airtight industrial mask, it was a comedy mask, nearly identical to the tragedy mask that I took back to Summer not so long ago. Beneath the eyes and the mouth of the mask was only darkness. Blood dripped from the mouth and eyes, blood that looked wrong. It was too thick and it ran too quickly as the masked monster lunged towards me, only for me to dodge out of the way as I ran towards the fire exit. I ran through the door and slammed it shut behind me as I took several deep breaths. "What the fuck happened?" I asked. No one. My back braced against the fire exit as I heard something pound against it from the other side. Winter was trying to get me, even through the fire exit. I peered over the cliff just a few meters from the fire exit. They did not plan this exit well at all. The only way I could get to the ship was by climbing down pipes. Time felt like it was practically flying by as I got a notification that it was only an hour before midnight. I took a deep breath as I opened the door, standing behind it, as Winter came barreling out of the building. She plunged over the cliff with nothing separating her from the cliff. The sound was like meat slapping rock. I peered over and she was no longer moving. I sighed as I let the fire exit door shut as I made my way down. I could see on the inside that Spring was sitting up. On her face was another mask, an angry mask, as she turned to peer my way. Door shut, I climbed down the pipes as quickly as I could. I could see the ships, but I could also hear the growls of the eyeless dogs. Thankfully, they were attracted to Winter's body as they feasted on her body as I made my way to the ship. I climbed up the ladders and I made it inside the rectangular ship with only a few minutes to spare. "Summer, what's going on?" "Something took over the others, something I've never seen before, something that isn't even in the bestiary. What is going on?" I asked her when I realized that Summer was not responding. My back to the open door, I felt my heart drop as she turned to face me. On her face was the mask that I brought to the ship. The eyes and mouth were gushing blood. Blood that coated the terminal's screen, keyboard, and switches. Her gloved hands were smeared in the blood as she raised her arms towards me, as she ran to me. The ship's engine turned on automatically as the ship began to lift, and she ran towards me and the open door, not noticing the pile of salvage separating us as she tripped over it and fell on the ship's walkway, just outside the doors. I slammed the button closing the doors as the ship's autopilot lifted the ship from the moon's surface, and I ran towards the terminal, desperately wiping the blood away with my gloves as I waited for the terminal to confirm we made it to orbit. The knocks behind me got weaker and weaker as we went higher and higher, and finally the knocks stopped entirely. I let out a desperate sigh, and then I began to laugh. I couldn't help myself. All of the adrenaline and fear finally came crashing down as I finally could sit with myself and process what happened. Whatever was happening with those masks took over my crewmates, and then it spread, maybe by the blood. I turned to the blood on the screen and on my hands, but I noticed something strange. The blood was no longer there. It evaporated. It didn't clot. It didn't harden like blood was supposed to do. It evaporated cleanly like it was hydrogen peroxide. So whatever blood it was, it did not last long. Was this why there was no blood in any of the facilities? Are the masks what killed all of the colonies on the moons? I laughed a little more as I began to feel the adrenaline crash, make my eyelids heavy. I remember the fact that I was supposed to call the company. I grabbed the phone on the terminal and I called the number. I blubbered what happened to the voice on the other end. When I was done, there was a robotic voice on the other end. The same automated voice that spoke at the company building and was on the phone for the interview. From what I could understand, they were going to tell their families, and that when I made it back to the company, that there would be replacements. The company then hung up before I could say anything else. Even when I tried to call them back, there was no response. I had no idea what to do next, so I just slid into my bunk and I fell asleep. Even with my equipment on, I fell asleep easily. Even if I thought that I couldn't sleep, I dreamt of darkness and laughing masks in the darkness before I finally woke up to the alarm from the automated system saying that it was now time to sell salvage to the company. I yawned as I checked the terminal. It confirmed that I was orbiting 71 Gordian, the moon that held the company. The terminal gave a little information on the moon. The population was unknown. The fauna, unknown. The weather, constant storms. No landmass with endless oceans. The only exception, the company. The autopilot ship brought me down to the only spot free of storms on the entire planet. In the center of the massive eye of the storm that covered the entire planet. A storm that never moved, and even inside the eye, the stars above were completely blacked out. The sea had colossal waves that would have eclipsed Olympus Mons, and the troughs went far deeper than Valles Marineris. And still, the bottom of the oceans was far too deep to be seen. Over 30 kilometers from the top of the waves to the very bottom, And still, the sea floor and sea life both lived far deeper than could possibly be seen. Only with the autopilot could we reach the company. In the very center of the eye of the storm that covered 71 Gordian was the company. Here, the sea was placid, and the structure more closely resembled an oil rig than anything else. Pipes and pylons connected the metal and concrete to the immeasurably deep seafloor. There were a few cargo containers stacked on the concrete, and a landing pad for the autopilot ships, and another concrete pad for supplies to arrive. The only impressive thing about the company was the giant concrete box that dominated the rig. The walls were so high that they disappeared into the darkness. Yet from the landing pad, only a few meters away is where the salvage is left for the company. A small alcove with a very small metal door that you could barely fit your arm through. A small bell looking like something you see on a receptionist's desks. A flickering incandescent bulb to light the alcove, and a small red neon sign showing us the buying rate. The closer to quota we get, the more it is worth. Today it was indeed what Summer predicted, 120% buying rate, an incredibly rare rate for the company to be buying. The company must have been desperate for what we had. I began the process of moving the pile of junk to the alcove, careful not to ring the bell, and far more careful not to listen to what was behind the concrete. Sometimes you hear movement behind the wall, movement that makes you think of faces being ground up while they scream, sounds that remind you of mountains being crushed by the weight of stars, sounds of something ancient, powerful, and cursed, being stirred from its slumber. It awakens a primal fear inside of you, a fear that is deep inside of every cell that screams that it is dangerous and you don't want to risk its anger, a fear you forget every time you leave the moon of Gordian, and every time you return, you feel that fear return as well. A fear you always forget, but always feels familiar. It feels so overwhelming you wonder how you're able to do your job, how you're able to move, how you're able to breathe. There was nowhere in the Thistle Nebula that was safe from what was trapped behind the company's walls, and all I could think was getting away from this place as I piled the junk as high as it could go. The junk piled high, the small door opened, and I backed away from the darkness in that door as I turned away and I headed back to the ship. I did not need to see what happened now. I saw it once, and I do not need to ever see it again. I don't need to see the darkness that made the screams inside of your head so much worse. I did not need to see the single tentacle reach out of the darkness, hooking around every item on the alcove, sweeping it all inside of the small door, even though there is no way all of it can fit inside of that door. I do not need to hear that automated voice that came from the broken speaker, the voice that warned me that these walls can't hold it. Merely glancing at the tentacle gave me nightmares of a golden planet full of people and life, only to be consumed by something far larger and far more terrible than the void of space. A darkness that might be held inside of the company, or far worse. The company may be hiding from that darkness. How did I forget so much and only remember it here on 71 Gordion? I should ask Summer for advice after we finish up this haul. Summer is at the terminal ordering new supplies since we lost flashlights and walkie-talkies on assurance. I hate it when we leave supplies behind, but it is well worth it. Winter helps me load up the haul to the company alcove, while Spring waits for the delivery of supplies. We load up the alcove, and instead of standing back, Winter stands close to the alcove as she keeps ringing the bell. She would learn quickly why we don't do that. We all laugh when the company reaches out from the darkness and grabs Winter, taking her inside of the company building. We all laugh as her bones break, her flesh squelches, and her equipment rips as she is pulled into the hole that is far too tiny to hold her. We all laugh as she writhes in agony, and she laughs along with us, even as her mandible is broken to allow her head to fit through. Faces being ground up inside the great beast laugh in pain as another joins them. The voices inside of the company laugh as well. The company laughs inside of the building, and the company echoes inside of my skull. Winter and I continue to load up the alcove, and now finished, Spring brings our supplies back to the ship. As I head to the ship, I notice a small graffiti tag on the concrete slab that our ship landed on. A tag that was so faded, I never would have noticed without near perfect light and timing. It was in familiar handwriting, although not one that I could definitively place. It was so faded that it probably had been there for at least 100 years, if not even longer. The green graffiti read, "Autumn was here, 1968. It said, and I giggled at that. Funny, I was also named Autumn, and it must have been a common name at the company. We all made it on the ship as the autopilot took us into orbit, and Summer began to break down where we were going next. We got a good haul, but the company raised the quota again, and we would have to meet it. It has been like that for the last 3 months. But I have been with this team the entire time, and we have handled every challenge that has come our way so far. Sure, it was hard work, but it's sure beating the mines on Chac M. I would have to ask Summer next time if she would buy me some spray paint. She keeps saying that it isn't essential and our budget is limited, but maybe I could convince her to let me do some overtime to pay for it."